Welcome to Season 2 of Time and Materials, a construction-only podcast powered by livecost.com, where we sit down with interesting people doing interesting things in construction. These construction experts kindly give us their time so that you can walk away with the tools to make better day-to-day decisions in your construction career. You're very welcome to another episode of the Time and Materials podcast. So this week I was joined by Alan Wilson. Alan is involved with Select, and Select are the trade association for electrical contractors within Scotland. And I really enjoyed this one because Alan has a unique insights here, right? And these unique insights are he's dealing with guys on the ground, and we discussed that. We jump into day-to-day problems that companies are having on the ground, such as the labour shortage. What does the apprentice pipeline look like? What impacts are material prices, for example, having? Like what havoc out there? What are some of the issues that are spinning out off the back of that? And we discuss all that. But Alan's also involved in other organisations such as the Construction Industry Collective Voice, and we're also looking at at government level in terms of regulation. What's happening there? What's being talked about at that level that's going to impact us on a day-to-day basis as companies? And we also talk about opportunity. So with the talk of the green agenda out there, what opportunity is that going to spin out for us as we look forward? So sit back and enjoy, and I hope you get some value out of my conversation with Alan Wilson of Select, the Trade Association for Electrical Contractors in Scotland. Okay, Alan, that is it. We are up and running. We are recording. First of all, Alan, great to have you on the show. You're very welcome to the Time and Materials podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, Ciaran. It's great to meet you, and I look forward to having a good conversation about the state of the industry in Scotland.
Good stuff. Good stuff. We were keen to get you on, and there's a few different points of interest with yourself, and I suppose I like to kick these off first of all, give people a bit of an understanding about the person that we're speaking to, where you've come from, all that type of stuff. I suppose first question: what is your own background? How did you end up in the positions that you're in today?
Okay, well, I've worked in construction in all sorts of different formats, Ciaran, since 1982. I started my first job with a builder's merchant as a trainee buyer, and then a buyer, and then I moved to a public sector client, an organisation in Scotland called Scottish Special Housing, which owned and managed thousands of houses across Scotland. So I was in the building department there. And then I moved after that to the Scottish and Northern Ireland Plumbing Employers Federation. So I was 27 years with SNPF. So a lot of work across technical, lobbying, marketing, membership. And then 8 years ago, I moved from SNPF to Select. Our Sunday name is the Electrical Contractors Association of Scotland. So I went there initially as head of membership and communications, and 3 years ago now, I was appointed managing director.
Excellent. Embedded in the industry.
Yeah, I've lived and worked through the industry for 40 years, I think it is now. Probably getting to that stage where I'm on the way out rather than the way in.
No, it's good. It's good stuff. I'm sure you've seen a lot of shift, a lot of change. I mean, where does COVID rank in the disruption to the industry through your period of time? Where does that rank? Where does that line up with what you've seen through the years?
I think it has to be at the very top of the list, Ciaran. I've lived personally and business-wise through a couple of recessions. 2008, most noticeably. When it was almost, I think, I was quoted in a newspaper article as saying someone switched the lights out, and overnight there was mass redundancies, sites closed. That was a really difficult time for the sector. But it's a very resilient sector, as you know. They always find a way to bounce back. They make cuts, they move things around, and good businesses keep going. But COVID was a whole new ball game. That was something that none of us have ever seen before. The country effectively being closed down, work stopping on pretty much every site, people not knowing what to do, and a bit of fear, I guess, for everyone. How long is this going to last? Or, are we going to come through this? So it was a real test for all of us individually and as a sector. There's no doubt about that. So I would say that COVID definitely ranks as is the most difficult challenge the industry's seen in my time.
You guys went on the front foot with the construction industry collective voice. Can you tell us a little about that, where that all stemmed from and what it's about?
Yeah, thanks, Ciaran. Yeah, CICV Forum, it was actually the COVID which was the trigger for that. So again, the fact that I had been around the Scottish construction industry for a long time meant I was aware of and knew most of the people in the trade and professional bodies, and indeed in contractors across Scotland. So we felt there was an opportunity, and something had to be done collectively to come together to help everyone in the industry, and that includes clients, includes the professionals, architects, surveyors, the contractors, the suppliers. Everyone really was in the same boat effectively. So CICV was formed. It's still going. Its new name that you mentioned a few moments ago. We've been very successful over the past 3 years. COVID especially was something that the CICV focused its efforts on, providing information to members on how to do work, both in domestic and commercial sites during COVID, providing signage for them to put up, providing all sorts of assistance, mental health support and advice, material support and advice. It was the whole A to Z, and we live in the CICV by the mantra of the 3 C's. So collaboration, collaborating and working together, commitment, everyone pushing at the same point and pushing behind the wheel to get things done, and the collaboration, working together. Because one thing is for sure, what I've learned throughout COVID is we're much stronger, we're much better working together than individually.
And is it like a member-based organization?
Effectively,
as in fees?
There's a nominal fee, a very small fee. I think it's £100, and it's open to trade and professional bodies who operate in Scotland. So we've got UK bodies who are Scottish branches, and we have Scottish organisations, Select being one of them. But just in the last few weeks, in fact, we've had a great success. We realised that the next crisis, although people are not really calling that is the net carbon agenda, and construction is going to play a huge part in helping moving that forward. So we ran a Green Home Festival connected to the Edinburgh Festival first week of August. So we had the launch of the festival by the Scottish Minister, Patrick Harvey. And then we ran about 20 both on-site and online events to educate both the industry and the general public about issues connected to the green agenda. So that was really helpful.
You mentioned net carbon there. Like, what do electrical contractors in particular need to be aware of when it comes to net carbon?
That's a really good point. A few years ago, we used to say in our kind of business plans and statements to our council at AGMs, the future is electric, because everything is heading that way. If you think about it, we're talking now because our laptops and computers are plugged into the mains. We're needing wireless for our internet connections. We've got lights on. Our heating works because electricity makes it work. So everything is connected to electricity. There's no getting away from that. We might not think that, but so we used to say electricity is the future. We now say electricity is the now. It just is now. And from an electrical perspective, what we see our member businesses and electricians generally do is, in many occasions, being the interface between the installation and the connection to the grid. So when it comes to solar PV panels or battery storage, air source heat pumps, because these are much more dependent on electricity than they perhaps used to be in the old traditional gas systems, electricians, or electricians plus, as you might call them in the future, are going to have to do all of these works to connect the systems up. The direct consequence in terms of electricians, in terms of their installations, is probably more likely to be around the electric vehicle installation charging points. And that's something that a lot of our members at Select are doing on a regular basis. And we're actually going to be launching next year a new classification of membership to take account of EVs, because like everything in construction, Ciaran, there's all different pieces of the cake. So we're going to have a classification for domestic work. So if you're getting a an EV charged in your home, you would need this type of qualification. If it was more about commercial, say, a small parking unit, or industrial where you're talking about big park and rides areas, there's different types of qualifications necessary. So electricians will play a massive, massive role in the green agenda because they are so vital in connecting everything together.
Yeah, you talk about the green agenda. You mentioned something there, just in terms of regulation, and just give you a bit of context around where this question comes from. I spent 9 years working in Australia on different sites. I'm a carpenter by trade, and I was able to waltz into Australia, go down to the local store, which is basically your local, let's say your Travis Perkins, purchase the tools, turn up the site, and away you go.
Yeah.
The electrical contractors had a different ball game. They had to resit exam, even though they were qualified, had to resit exams and go through what wasn't easy to make sure that when they landed on site that they were vetted, regulated, and they couldn't do anything in an Australian site until they had that certification. Where do Scottish, UK general contractors sit in terms of that type of regulation? What's in place, and what's your opinion on current state of regulation?
Okay. I'll talk about Scotland first, and then I'll talk about the broader UK context. So in Scotland, you don't have to be a qualified electrician to do electrical work, or indeed call yourself an electrician. So you can turn up at someone's home with a van, which normally says plumber, electrician, painter, joiner, and one person will get out the van. And I'm always amazed by that. They must be some kind of individual if they could do all of these jobs. So that's the first issue. The plumbing apprenticeship, and I know we might talk later about this, but the plumbing apprenticeship is normally completed over a 4 or 5 year status, and it includes time at college and time spent with the employer. And in Scotland, and indeed in England and Wales, it includes an end point assessment. It's in Scotland, it's a final integrated competence assessment, or FICA for short. So these people, both adults and young people, have to, at the end of their college-based training and the time with their employer, have to set a 2-day assessment and pass that before they're qualified as an electrician by the industry, or known as an electrician. But yet anyone in Scotland, or indeed in the UK generally, can turn up at your home and say, or advertise in local press and say, I'm an electrician, and do work with no qualifications, with no experience, and that just can't be right. So for the last number of years, we've been running a campaign with Scottish Government initially to try and get the industry regulated. We managed to get into the government's programme for government a few years ago that they would consult. The consultation took place now just before the initial period of lockdown with COVID, and there was an overwhelming support for some form of regulation. So what we've called for is what's called protection of title. So that means to call yourself an electrician, you would have to have industry recognised qualifications and experience. And I don't think that's a difficult thing to do. People expect, if you turn up the door, to be an electrician, to do that. And your point about carpenter is well made as well, because for me, the whole industry should be regulated, because you can always do damage, and people don't want to be ripped off whatever part of construction they use. So the government decided, despite the fact there was overwhelming support, not to legislate. They didn't feel that it was in the public interest. So we've now connected with an MSP who's preparing to table a member's bill in the next few weeks or months, which would start the debate about regulation of the industry. And we're hopeful that that will then apply. That's obviously for Scotland, and it's only a limited aspect of work. It wouldn't stop someone still calling themselves something else and pretending to be an electrician. In the UK more broadly, I think everyone now recognises the dangers associated with unqualified people. And even in the UK, there is steps towards more form of, you might say, informal regulation. The Building Safety Bill, which is now through Parliament and which is now going through its stages of, how does this actually impact, is putting more and more emphasis on qualifications for different individuals and for installers. So that will have an impact in a positive way as well. So I'm hopeful in my way that before I retire, that we will have some form of regulation in Scotland, at least protection of title. And, it definitely has to be done because, electricians is such a vital and safety conscious industry that to have someone go in and do work, which is probably more likely, sadly, to result in their own injury or death rather than the public, but it can cause that as well, is so vital. It has to be done.
On the business side of things then as well, it creates this uneven, like I think what everybody wants is just a level playing field. Like, if I'm a business and I'm operating the right way and I'm doing things the right way, well, then I'm making sure I'm putting in the right materials and I'm doing things. And and if I'm not, and I'm cutting corners, and then I'm doing things at a lesser cost, I can price jobs at a lesser cost, and it does create this uneven playing field. There's no question about that. You mentioned Select a couple of times there, and we haven't actually touched on Select. What is Select, and what is your role within there?
Sure. Okay, well, Select, our Sunday name is the Electrical Contractors Association of Scotland. So we were founded in 1900. I think we're the oldest of what you might say the more modern trades. We are Scotland's biggest trade association, 1,250 member businesses. Within that, we have a number of different organisations. So the Scottish Joint Industry Board, which regulates the individuals, has around 15,000 electricians registered. We have a staff of just under 50. So again, biggest in terms of that for Scotland. So like any trade association, we have a number of principal activities, technical advice and support. Earlier this year in May and June, we held our first face-to-face toolbox talks for 3 years. So these are physical presentations of updates of electrical industry technical knowledge. So there's new wiring regulation amendment comes into force at the end of this month, Amendment 2, which is a number of changes to the way in which electrical work is carried out.
And are you delivering them, Alan, to cross-board, whether you're a first-year apprentice or are you going out and delivering them to business owner, and it's on the business owner then to pass a message?
Okay. We pass them principally to business owners, but the businesses can bring their staff with them, so they could bring their operatives and their apprentices. It will be fed into the apprenticeship because Select plays a key part in the apprenticeship training through the SGIB. It's an SGIB scheme for electrical apprentices. So Select and the trade union Unite work together on the development of that. So my colleague Fiona Harwood is the secretary of the SGIB. One of her principal roles is to make sure that the training that's given to the electrical apprentices is up to date with all of the amendments and new technology. So, for example, apprentices now are being taught about EV installations, about battery storage installations, smart metering, smart lights. That's all included in the apprenticeship, as part of what they do in their training over that 5-year period.
With Selecting, what would you say is the main benefit for an electrical contractor being part of a trade association like Select?
Okay. I guess, lots of people, first of all, it's not mandatory. You don't have to be a member. And I guess there's lots of different things we do. One of our principal activities is our technical support, and that includes our technical helpline, as well as our training courses. So we do a lot of training. We train about 2,000 electricians a year. These are qualified electricians, so updating their qualification on wiring regulations. We do some EV installation training in association with some of the colleges. We do training on PAT testing, portable appliance testing. We do training on inspection and testing. So that technical aspect, that technical knowledge is really what is the standout, the USP, I guess. Lots of the other things we do, lots of trade and professional bodies do, we do great advice and support on things like employment advice. We do great things on lobbying and marketing. We promote the Select brand and name so that we're hoping as many members as possible benefit from that. But the real USP is the technical team. These are well experienced, great qualified people led by a director of technical services who's got probably 45 years of experience in the industry, and knows the regs and the industry inside out, so we definitely have that as our number one.
Excellent. What issues are the members sort of seeing? Like, I mean, there's a lot of issues in there at the moment. We've got this energy sort of crisis that's going to play itself out, and no one really knows what's coming ahead with winter. But I suppose in the day to day, I mean, labor. Let's say labor, for an example. Are your members having similar issues what we're seeing across the industry with labor shortages?
I I think there's an issue in terms of labour, and this was an interesting one. Came out of our council or our board meeting just last week. The pipeline in has been generally very positive for electricians. So, for example, this year our apprentice intake is approximately 950 apprentices. You know, again, we're the biggest single apprenticeship program across construction in Scotland. You know, although CITB and its coverage across all the trades is bigger, individually, electricians are the biggest. And we had 850 last year. Now, that in itself is quite a statement, because businesses are saying we've got work, or we expect to employ you for 4 or 5 years, and we take you through. So they need apprentices to do work, because, as I said earlier, electricity is the now. So the work is there, and it's probably been sliced and diced in a slightly different way. The interesting thing for me is when we spoke to Central Board recently about the future and about apprenticeship numbers and about skill shortages. As you will probably know yourself, Ciaran, from working in construction, it's a bit like the farming industry. It's either too much work or too little work. There's never the right amount of work. It's a bit like farmers, too hot, too cold, never right. But most of them pitch it right. And most of them, what they say to me is that they can cope with a slight downturn in work, but if it gets any more than that, they might have to look at staff. If they get any more work, that's when the difficulty arises, especially with qualified people. Because as I said a few moments ago, bringing an apprentice on is great, but it's 4 or 5 years. But what we're finding, interestingly, from a few members saying, is that after apprentices complete their time, maybe after a couple of years of experience, they're moving into other areas. Now, that's always kind of happened. You know, people, you said yourself, you went to Australia, you know, for a better life, maybe a bit more money. Lots of people in the industry left in the 80s and 90s and went offshore, you know, in Scotland especially, you know, for the oil industry. So it was following the money, which, you know, young families, etc., who would blame them? But what we're finding now in the industry, electrical industry, is people are moving on to wind farms, to data centres, big data centres opening across Europe. I think there's a fairly significant one in Southern Ireland. So although we're training 950 and we'll have a dropout in maybe, I don't know, 5-6%, when we get to that sort of bulk of 800 or 850 completing, probably within a 2 or 3 year period, 250 will move away into other parts of the sector, not in the mainstream electrical sector. So that means, you know, we're always going to be one step behind, you know, and that's a difficult thing to catch up on. So I know that's a kind of long-winded answer to saying, is there a skill shortage? In certain areas, firms are finding it difficult just now, but by and large, they're generally coping. I know it's probably more pronounced in other areas, especially in things like stonemasonry, the building industry generally, you know, plasterers and so forth, is more difficult.
I mean, the wet trades are definitely the one that you'd look at and say you'd have to have concerns whether a younger generation are probably a little bit they've got access to more information than, let's say, even in my time. And you know, I served my time, actually I just came out of my time 2008, so not that long ago, I suppose. But like, even then, you've got a lot more access to information about what the other trades might look like, what that potential, as you say, if I do this electrical trade now, could it potentially lead to something offshore where the multiples of wage goes right up. And I just think they have access to a lot more information. I think that would be the one area I'd look to and say, I think got to start thinking about maybe a shared apprenticeship model, just so it takes them. I mean, at the end of the day, the burden's on the company, right? The company have got to pick up the apprentice, and if, as you say, when work drops, you know, the apprentice has to be kept going, and maybe a shared apprenticeship scheme is something that would potentially keep those numbers up. The other thing outside of labor that's causing havoc out there is materials. What are your members seeing there in terms of the impact of high rising material prices, and what have they been feeding back to you? You know, what sort of problems is that causing on projects?
Yeah. Well, as you're kind of hinting at using the word projects, there's two different distinct issues. You know, if you look at the commercial aspect, lots of prices are done in advance. So what you might have priced even 3 months ago isn't the price you're going to be paying now or even in a month or so's time. So the difficulty sometimes, and I've seen it in some businesses recently who have gone out of business, saying that, you know, clients were not willing to renegotiate deals, you know, and putting businesses out of business. Now, for me, that's a hugely short-sighted way of dealing with things. I know it's difficult for everyone. And the point I made recently to some Scottish government officials is, and they were asking, you said earlier, you know, what are the lessons learned in COVID? They were asking me, what are the lessons learned from the 2008 crash recession? And I said, well, at that time, the industry probably had an element of fat around it, you know, where there was lots of people working in there. You know, I remember going to a site at the time I was working in the plumbing organisation, and they had about 50 operatives on, including a number of labourers who were there just to keep the thing going. They weren't qualified, they were just bodies there. And of course, when the recession happened, they were able to cut a lot of the kind of unqualified and people away from that. But what happened, of course, in that era, and you mentioned that's when you qualified, is that lots of people left the industry and never came back. So that level of fat you might have had then is not there anymore. So if clients are difficult on pricing, they might find themselves in a few years' time when things pick up again, that there's not the businesses there to do the work. So they have to be realistic about things. I know everyone's in the same boat, but a bit of give and take, a bit about this, the 3 C's back again for CSEV: collaborate, commit, and cooperate. Because if you don't, I can assure you that businesses will remember. And if you're not being, you know, trying to play properly with them in a few years' time when things are different, then they might not come back and there might be a contractor to do it. So I think it's important in those commercial projects for conversations to take place, for people to be realistic about things and find fixes. As I said earlier, the industry is very resilient in finding fixes to lots of things, and there are fixes to be had. In the domestic market, it's slightly different because you give someone a quotation that normally lasts for 14 or 28 days, and hopefully we haven't seen the huge fluctuations that we maybe saw a few months ago, certainly in our sector. Recently. So people in the domestic market are now thinking, well, I'll do that work because that's the price. That's what I'll pay. The question, of course, now is, as we all face the likelihood of, even with a price cap, more expensive fuel bills, the possibility of extra mortgage payments, are people going to perhaps, you know, rather than putting on an extension, they might just, well, I'll hold fire for a year or two. So that material cost and energy cost rises, slowly starts to eradicate confidence for the public and the work in the domestic environment, which is where most businesses operate. You know, there is this obsession, certainly in government circles, that it's all about big cranes and holes in the ground and massive big projects, but that's not the reality. The reality is small businesses, architects, surveyors, plumbers, joiners, brickies, electricians doing small works, rewiring homes, putting on extensions, new bathroom suites. That's the real business of the industry day to day. And it's that type of work that might begin to slow up, and that has knock-on consequences for us all.
It does, yeah. I mean, it feels like on the domestic side of things, the only way to deal with that is literally just having that open conversation. What you're having. Listen, we priced this 2 months ago in good faith. We've seen a 20% increase in whatever it might be. Here's some evidence of that increase.
Yeah,
we're not trying to have you here. What do you want me to do? Like, we can't be a loss-making business, that we just can't do it. And I think conversations are the only way to deal with it. No one wants to have that conversation, but I think it's the only way to deal with it.
Yeah.
On the commercial side, I agree with you. A lot more difficult conversation. You're bringing in commercials. You're bringing in. You can take a bit of the human aspect out of it there. Where that's a contracts and all that type of stuff are tricky to navigate, but difficult one. There's no question. On the positive side, I spoke to someone just recently who's very, very embedded in the whole material side of things across the board, really. But I suppose what he was describing to me was, commodities are commodities, and we don't really know. But anything that's being manufactured that's coming in, he believes that there was going to be this leveling out period, because at the end of the day, the manufacturers have gone bananas in the last 12 months trying to catch up. The market's going to take a dip, and then there's going to be an oversupply, and we all know what happens then. And he said that should steady the ship, and his predictions were next year that we should see a steadying, which is positive for us all.
Yeah, I can see that possibility, because there has been a huge amount of catch up. Businesses who put off projects have been trying to get them completed as quickly as possible. So yeah, that's entirely possible that could happen.
The green agenda, you mentioned this green agenda. Where does the opportunity lie from a business point of view? Where does the opportunity lie for electrical contracting business when we're looking at all this new and new great ways, let's call it, new great ways of doing business? But where would the opportunity lie for me as an electrical business owner?
As an electrical business, I think, as I said earlier, Ciaran, I think, that there's probably a couple of distinct opportunities. There is the initial integrator opportunity, and what I've found in my experience over the years, happens all the time and happened years gone by. You find it certainly in every area, not just in rural areas where I stay, but in every town and city, probably across the UK and I'm sure in Ireland as well. You have little groups of contractors who kind of come together, so you get maybe a builder and a plumber and an electrician, working together kind of thing. So what we're finding is that there's little groups of these organizations who will be doing solar PV installations. So the builder will be doing the scaffolding and the installations of the panel. The electrician will be connecting the electrical cables into that. The plumber will be upgrading the system internally and connecting to the existing, if it's a gas or solid fuel boiler. So that little bit of team working goes on. I think the important thing for the electrical industry is to understand how these things work. I don't think we're really going to see many electrical businesses starting to install these completely. Some will, but the majority will still carry on that integrator role. So it's important that they understand how that does. So that's an opportunity there. Get to know the technology, get to know how it works and how you could play a part in that. Definite opportunity. When it comes to the more direct side of things, like electric vehicle battery or electric vehicle installation for charging points, that's where there is a direct opportunity for businesses to get connected to that. So there are courses out there already that are operating. As I said earlier, we'll be launching a scheme for members next year to get them to register as an EV installer, and that's real direct opportunities. So the fact that everything is going to run on electricity, and pretty much does at the moment, means that there's a great future ahead for electricians. I mean, I've got 7 grandchildren, and I'd be disappointed if one of them didn't become an electrician at some point in the future. And that kind of leads on to another conversation. We talked earlier about the skills shortage of the future and so forth. We have an ongoing agenda across the industry of having to get more women into the sector. I bore my colleagues with this at every other meeting, but in Scotland, when I was born, 1964, there were something like 150,000 born that year and about 70,000 died. So we were a net plus of 80,000. In 2016, 17, it had flipped. So there's actually more people dying now in Scotland than being born. And with the limitations on labour because of the Brexit situation, we have a ever-smalling pool of people to call on. And with simple maths, 50% of them are going to be girls, very simple. So at the moment, the whole industry, by and large, and I include the professionals in this because I think they're a little bit better, but not much, are missing out. But that takes a lot of thought and a bit of, you were saying earlier about, if you were a young person now looking at your career, imagine a young girl, first of all, they've got the situation where their parents will be probably negative about construction anyway as a girl. Why do you want to go into that? And then you've got what do I want to be within that? And then the whole kind of ethos around construction that's still out there. So we really need to tackle this properly. And I don't think anyone has an answer at the moment, and I count that amongst Europe as well. Select sits on an organization called Europon, which is a gathering of European trade bodies. So we speak to Germans and Dutch and Danes and Swedes and French, etc., etc. And none of them has a complete answer. Some of them have a little bit of an answer, and some of them, are saying this has worked, but they're only talking about, maybe percentages of, say, 5 or 6% of women in the industry, rather than maybe 20%, whereas Scotland's standing at maybe 1%, So we need to really take some steps there. I think that is to be vital going forward, and the new technology, green technology, that maybe excites people more broadly. If you go to a school and talk to primary kids, they're very much focused on, my grandkids are aged between sort of 9 and 2. So the ones at school, a lot of it is about, the environment and the planet and saving energy and all these things. So there's opportunities now to talk to these kids that perhaps didn't exist a few years ago when it was all about. So construction generally has to reinvent itself, I think, to try and capture these minds, these younger minds and people there. And there's also the older community, people who might be leaving other sectors. How can we maybe bring them into the industry as well, with experience and so forth? So I think the industry is going to face a fairly significant change across the next few years for all sorts of different reasons, and I think I'm broadly optimistic. If you talk to people that know me, they'll say I'm a kind of a guy who is glass half full. I think there's always cause for optimism in any situation. And I think there is optimism for the sector. As I said before, it's very resilient, having worked in it for 40 years and seen lots of ups and downs. It gets there and it does it, so I'm optimistic that we'll do things. So the electrical industry has a very bright future. And the fact that we depend more and more on it means that for me, certainly, selfishly, if I talk about Select only, for electricians, it's a really great time to be around.
Couldn't agree more. And on that positive note, we'll wrap it up. If someone wants to get in touch with yourself, Alan, or Select, or indeed the CICV, where can they find out more about that?
Well, the best thing is just to go to our website, Ciaran. If you just Google Select or CICV, you'll get more information there. And we're happy to speak to anyone, obviously. We're running, just you said earlier about, information to people as well as members. We're running a information toolbox talk for surveyors and consultant engineers in a few weeks' time in Glasgow. And again, that's another great opportunity to get information out. So if anyone that listens to the podcast is interested in coming along to that, go onto the website and email us, and we'll see if we can get you a space if you want to come along.
Super stuff. Alan, I really appreciate the time. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks, Ciaran. Have a good day.
Cheers, Alan. Time and Materials is brought to you by LiveCost, the construction software fully designed to manage your construction financial forecasts. Visit livecost.com to take a product tour, or reach out to our team of construction cost experts to transform your project profits. Any links mentioned during this episode, including speaker profiles or any other resources, are available on the podcast show notes. Your feedback is also welcome. We would really appreciate if you could take a moment to leave us a review or email your comments, guest suggestions to hello@timeandmaterials.com. Finally, if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for listening. Until next time, I'm your host, Ciaran Brennan.